You are listening to the Firecracker Podcast with Tony Rico.
Okay, well, hello everybody, and I always try to increment a little bit. I think we're up to maybe 30 listeners with our attempt to try to provide information to our softball culture. But we have, I could say special. I could say there's a lot of words you can use to describe you, Sue. But word that comes to me is you were one of the first people that befriended me from the softball world in the college, and so we've got Sue ENQUIST with us. That is, she wears many hats and many accomplishments, and so connected to the history of our softball culture. But really, what brought you in today is we're going to talk a little bit later about we had an event where we lost one of our players in our culture, and just trying to be proactive on a much bigger scope and bigger level. But I really appreciate you coming down. I know you're busy and you got 1,000 things going on, and especially recently, you've been really active in the activities that have been taking place surrounding this event. But thanks for coming in. And it used to be a lot more local, living here in Huntington.
Well, first, thanks for having me. Yeah,
Sure.
I was a neighbor right up the street.
Yeah, and then you moved back down to San Clemente, and what year was that?
That was in '08.
And retired from UCLA coaching position in what year? I think you mentioned 12 years ago.
Yes, in '06 I retired after 27 years coaching and was there for 36 total as a player, coach, and administrator.
Wow. And so we're going to touch upon that. And just to pull myself into it, I'm not sure if I know the answer to this, but we go back to about, I'm going to say maybe early 2000s.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I mean, we knew each other before that, but I think as we were working up our ranks and developing some type of product, I think Kristen Dedman was the first player that we might have connected on. But we go back a ways. And so I wanted to thank you just, again, with all of the accomplishments, and a lot of times accomplishments and success, don't always go hand in hand with humility and people just being warm and reaching out. But I want to thank you because I'd like to think you've seen me grow just a little bit, or at least gain a lot of experience in the last 20-something years since we got to meet each other. So thanks for everything that you've given to me and all the support that you've given. And it's great to have you in here just kind of catching up on some things. So.
Well, it's just great to be here. I look forward to our conversation.
You laid, for me, I touched upon it a little bit at the memorial service on Sunday when I talked about the ladies to my right, but I feel so fortunate that our softball, this sport has blown up so much. The amount of the industry is strong, even the softball economy, whether it's lesson structure, tournament participation. For myself down here within the travel unit, it's just growing. And I go back to the exciting games of the World Series. There wasn't a ton of regional coverage, I think, before the World Series. I know they weren't covering all regionals. I know the TV coverage is so blown up right nowadays. But I want to go back to even some 90s. There were some days in the 90s that I can remember an occasional game on whatever channel it was, and I was just wondering about some history of some classic matchups, some classic games. I remember somewhere on one of my VHS tapes, I have Lisa Fernandez, Michelle Granger at bat. Michelle pitching, it might have been at UCLA, it might have been at Cal. And you can kind of piece together what you remember about this. But I remember Lisa stepping in the box, really composed, calling timeout, maybe mid-pitch or just before she started the windup. Granger didn't take too kindly to it. I believe she rolled the next ball, just threw it in the dirt, and maybe the pitch after that hit the backstop. And it seemed like she was playing like mind games, and they were playing mind games with each other. And so this was just my take on it. And it got to a 3-2 count, and Lisa ends up getting a walk to first base. So the outcome wasn't this magical outcome, but this battle between Granger and Fernandez, and I was new. I was only a few years into coming into softball, so it took a lot to kind of grasp me and kind of really impress me. But was that as intense as I remember it, or some of those battles? Or
I think when you look at the history of the game and you have certain individuals that, in reflection, were responsible for taking the sport to the next level.
Yes.
And when you have somebody like Lisa Fernandez, we knew at the time that she was special, but you don't really get the accolades until after the fact. You don't get the influence in the sport until the sport says you did it all. Yeah. And when you have another individual in the circle, like Granger, who from day one, when you meet Michelle Granger and how she exuded confidence, and you just knew, and we recruited her hard. I mean, here's the back channel stuff, right? Mm-hmm. We recruited her, we knew. Granger was such a phenomenal athlete, and she was extremely smart, and so we knew it was going to come down to UCLA and Cal, and I can remember like it was yesterday walking down her driveway and saying to myself, and Sharon Backus, who was the head coach at the time, I was an assistant, co-head coach, and I said, wherever she goes, she is going to either sustain our success or she's going to create a new legacy for a program. And even though she doesn't get credit for the titles at Cal, she laid the foundation for the players to want to go to Cal.
Yes.
That allowed them to be successful.
Yes.
So I could share with you a million just showdowns between those
It just
gladiators.
seems a different level of intensity, and you're talking about, you dealt with the greatest players against the greatest players, so there's going to be numerous examples of that, but that was just something that really stuck out because it just seemed like, I don't want to use the word, or maybe I want to use the word rogue a little bit with Granger. I mean, she just seemed a little, a little uncontained sometimes or something, and again, she let that ball go up in the backstop, and I felt like it wasn't an accident. I think like she was sending a message.
Well, I have a unique position because I know Lisa Fernandez, and Lisa Fernandez is not a game player. She's not a cat and mouser. Lisa Fernandez is the most talented student athlete that I ever had an opportunity to coach from a collegiate standpoint or from a national team. And Granger, ironically, I had an opportunity to coach with her on the national team. And my favorite story about her, and this is where I think you are on point, is Granger has so much swagger. And she can back it up. She's not like, hey, I'm going to have swagger. She just has swagger. Yeah. And I'll never forget, this is a great story. I'll try to be brief. Sorry, everybody, that we're going down memory lane.
But okay.
Granger was a go-to. We were on, this was back in the day when we had the sports festival. The national team would break up teams and we'd play each other. And I was co-head coaching with Larry Mays of the Panther dynasty. And we, just by chance, we ended up with the young team. So we had all these young college kids and young high school kids that were on our national team in the sports festival. And I remember talking to Larry. We met right here, and he's like, well, we got a young team. I said, yeah, but we've got Granger. We have got the monster. And then we've got all these young kids. So I'll never forget the first pitching meeting. We had a little baby catcher. She was destined to be great, and it was Klein. And I'll never forget this. Granger says, hey, listen, don't worry about calling any pitches. You just worry about catching it. And when I'm going to throw a rise ball, I'm going to flip my glove up. And when I'm going to throw something down, I'm just going to flip it down. We're not going to go through signals. I don't want you to think about anything. Just catch it. And we're going to, you know what? Wow. We're going to blow through this tournament, and we're going to win.
Wow.
Because me and you. That's all she said. And Klein just literally, we went through it, and we ended up upsetting everybody, and we won the whole thing. Wow. And I always tell the story that it was because Granger had that clarity. Yeah. The great ones have clarity when no one else does.
Yeah, a sense of certainty,
a
state of being without doubt.
Yep.
Right.
You know, we're down by one. You guys don't worry about it. We got a lot of ball left.
Right.
Like she was that person.
Yeah.
I love that about her. Hated competing against her because I knew that, but loved coaching her.
Well, and I, again, even with players, I think it's important to talk about them and not let their legacies die and to keep things because, again, they created the groundwork for everything that we're doing today. And you had mentioned Larry Mays, and we were talking a little bit earlier about, I came in as a pretty overly confident, inexperienced, ignorant coach back in the days of the 90s, so I got my lessons were all in front of me. But we go back to, for me, I would think my first year was 1990, 1991, and I know travel ball had been around before that. But if we think back to some of the figureheads that really established the groundwork for the travel programs, and so, we mentioned Larry Mays, we mentioned Gary Hanning, obviously, and then we were talking a little bit about a gentleman named Phil Bruder. And so I was asking, if we were to create a grassroots Hall of Fame and create statues to these guys, what poses would we put them in? And because they were so different, right? And they are so different. I mean, they're still around, but Larry's no longer coaching. But they were so different. But, tell me a little bit about that, and if you can throw in a Phil Bruder story or something like that, because I think it's important that we keep these memories alive. So
I think what we as a sport overall need to do a better job is to create, maybe it is the travel ball organizations need to come together more to recognize that whole body, because they're responsible for the development of softball. The travel ball organizations aren't getting credit for the talent that people like me received. So the colleges are getting the credit. ESPN was the amplifier. But let's talk about if we didn't have the Larry Mazes and the Phil Bruters and the Gary Hennings and the Doug Myers and all of these people's, the Tony Ricos, to raise the bar. So by the time they came to college, they were playing at such a high level.
Yeah.
And I can remember, well, when I think about Larry Mays, first of all, I think about a true professional. He was an individual that was highly organized. Like I said earlier, I got a chance to coach with him, so I got behind the curtain. Mm-hmm. His level of detail, his level of organization, but most importantly, his integrity stands alone in my experience in the travel ball industry. He was an individual that never let the game come first. He was always about taking care of the players and their parents. But the game goes to another level when you have somebody like the Raiders.
Yes.
And you've got Phil Bruder, who was this demonstrative, cocky, just a big know-it-all.
If we're writing the script, we're writing that character into the script, right? I mean, because he's perfect for the movie.
Oh, and here's the great thing. What I appreciated about Phil Bruder, and I had a relationship with Phil for many, many years, and he was there long before everybody else. And you either loved him or you put up with him.
Right.
And I was kind of the person that what I enjoyed about Phil Bruder the most was his honesty. Phil Bruder was one of the rare coaches that would call me up and say, hey, I know you're looking at so-and-so, and I love her. She's my girl. She's my starting position player. But I need to tell you, I went out to Colorado, and there's a kid from Kansas. He was that guy. So he had a professionalism around a responsibility to the college coaches that were going to be making a big financial commitment, that he wasn't going to put his kids first if it couldn't be backed up. And I think that's something that Phil never got a lot of credit for. Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, the guy was a showman. Yeah. He knew how to get his team to play as one. He knew how to be a distraction. And I know we were talking about this earlier, but I can remember days where the coaching colleagues would go, hey, are you guys going to that Panther, Raider game? And they're like, wow, we're not recruiting anybody, but we're still going because it's such a show. Yeah, sure. And I can remember, people that played for Phil, I was always interested in those players because they knew how to handle pressure. And Phil would create the conditions where there would be a very small margin for error if you play for the Raiders. Mm-hmm. And we knew at UCLA, if you could handle that pressure, you can handle playing for UCLA. But I could go on for days. My favorite story was we were in, I believe it was Texas, and it's like 112. It was probably only 98, but the older
sure,
I
with
get,
the humidity and everything.
The older
sure,
I get, the hotter
right,
it was.
Right. Sure.
And the other team is just kind of going through the motions. And here come the Raiders. They were like gold and black, and his kids are wound so tight in a positive way, meaning they were chanting. And I'll never forget, I'm sitting in the bleachers, and he runs over to the chain link fence, and he jumps on the fence like Spider-Man, and just starts screaming like, "We're ready!" And then he had a kid, I was always so impressed with her, and I believe she played for Cal, was Ronnie Deutsch, and she's right behind him. And she jumps a little bit higher. And here you've got two humans.
On the fence.
On the fence like Spider-Man.
Right.
Like screaming. And it's travel ball.
Right.
You can't help but get fired up, right?
Right.
But those were those days. It was a little crazy, but the intensity, it was a time where those kids played the game so hard. They were so competitive. I know today travel ball struggles with the kids. They're not playing just out of passion. Like, right. That was the passion generation.
Sense, right? Sure.
That was the competitive generation. There's no doubt. And you see, I feel like I should give Phil Bruder half my pension check because we got so many kids from the Raiders.
Now, were your teams comprised of? I mean, did you have to take try to keep it politically balanced, or were there some years that you were, more Panthers than Raiders, more Raiders, or did it go through kind of some time phases when those programs were stronger? And then the other question I think that is in my mind is, did those players ultimately did they play the same at the highest level, knowing they took different roads to get there, or was there a difference in a Phil Bruder player, a Larry Mace player, a Gary Hanning player?
Yeah, there was. I mean, I think there were a lot of similarities between the Batbusters and the Raiders. There was just an edge. The Panther player would come in with polish. They would have a sense of polish. And I don't mean that in a negative way that the Batbusters weren't polished.
No, but
it was
let's
just
say more tenacity, more competitive, more
sassy. They were sassy.
Yeah,
and the Panthers would have a little bit of a Raider sometimes, and a Raider would have a little bit of a Panther. So
but
you can't
reflect Larry's professionalism and his demeanor.
Yes,
and so and for people that didn't get a chance to see these guys coach, I mean, that's what we're trying to capture. Their teams were a reflection of the personality of the coach to some degree, and it really worked.
And even, Tony, even when people would always say, how do you get those kids to play together? Well, when the standard is so high, no one has time to say, I don't like the way you're approaching that. Everybody is so locked in on the standard. So when you put ultra competitive alpha competitors together and then you raise the bar because you're now at UCLA, and the margin for error is so small, because if you're a Raider, you're a Panther, you're a Firecracker, the majority of teams that you're going to play, you're going to kick their tail.
Right.
When you get to college, it's not that way.
Right.
So now there are a lot of people that are
It's the
capable.
best against the best.
The
right?
best against the best. And so
your personal failures higher. You're not going to always have the outcomes you want, but
right. So it was really molding them around, this is how we manage success and failure. And so it really took them off, oh, she's a Raider or she's a Batbuster. And it would only come up when we were recruiting people, right?
Right.
So, we'd be recruiting a Batbuster, so the Batbuster kids naturally are just, oh, she's all it. And they're like, well, she's not that all it, right? Yeah. So it was there was such a respect there that people don't realize. There was so much respect.
Coming from different programs, did they come under the UCLA, come into the UCLA culture and instantly respect each other? Or is there some of that tension and then it took a little while for them to kind of build that?
No, there was not that tension. And I think that is demonstrated by their parents and the way they were raised. Yeah. You may get a feisty Raider, but you pull off the label of that travel team, and I think Phil Bruder did a great job of recruiting great families, because the families of the Raiders or the Batbusters or the Firecrackers, they stood apart. And there is a common theme among great parents. Whether these parents, their kids played for the Raiders or the Panthers or the Batbusters, there was one common theme, and that was accountability. The parents had accountability with their children to be able to have that child own their success and their failure. And the finger pointing, there was none of that. Even when, after the fact, the student athlete now has graduated from one of these travel ball programs, they're now in college, they're talking about their travel ball experience in front of their parents. Their parents would look at them and say, inappropriate. You just passed the buck on somebody.
Right.
And so the parenting similarities lied in, you are responsible for your own success and your own failure, and you will be the one that gets beyond it. And if you do fall short, you're going to own it.
So, I was going to say, it sounds like ownership. Yeah.
And
it's really great for you to bring that up and to point that out, because, again, I think from the outside, or a lack of really being able to understand what was taking place, that you wouldn't think that was taking place. But that's extremely important, because it's not prevalent enough nowadays, and it's lended itself to a little more of sometimes the wild, wild west environments that we have out there, where there's no filters or boundaries or things like that. So I think that's very important.
And when you talk about the Raiders, on the outside, people call them the Wild Banshees.
Yeah.
But you get inside his program, he had a lot of discipline.
Sure. That was the persona, though. It's like kind of the Oakland Raiders. It's a persona. It's designed to disrupt. And that's what I meant about if we were scripting it, you don't script all good guys. I mean, you got to, the perception of someone going out there and neener, or whatever it is to kind of take you out of your game, whatever. I mean, to me, that's fascinating. And we're really talking about, I appreciate you throwing our name in there, but we're really talking about the era from, what was it, mid-'80s, late 80s? Through the 90s, where these three programs were really, and obviously the Batbusters have continued. I call them the Yankees of softball with the longevity, but we're talking about that era, right? I mean,
yeah, we are. And when you talk about sustainability, it really is those people understanding who they need to have in place to sustain the discipline that drives their values. So Gary Henning knew exactly what he was doing, and then the people he brought in to help sustain that, I don't think that gets recognized enough.
Well, Mike Stith being a big part of that program and coming over and being able to do that because I think that's, as you understand leadership, that you delegate and you pass on, and it doesn't just leave with you, or if you can create a situation where it doesn't leave with you. And so to me, it's, it's going to sound funny for people to hear the head of an organization talking admirably about other organizations, but I think, again, that's a stigma, and that's something that happens in our culture, that the bad mouthing of this, or you got to be of this, or you can't play for them, or whatever. But these guys are and women are working very hard. It's all grassroots. It's all volunteer based time. It's all there's, and then the level of players that these guys were developing, and the longevity, like I say, of the Batbuster organization going back from the 80s and all the way through, and what Mike's doing with it right now. And I'm really glad he took the name back and kept it going, because there's a lot to be there. Being in that environment the first time, in that, I called it groundbreaking this last weekend, though, but it's Yankee Stadium. Is what it is. There's something there that you feel the history and things like that. And look, and even within the major leagues, the Giants had a good run and built a great venue. There's plenty of room for others to have success within this. But we have to acknowledge the history. I think that's part of our responsibility, is to acknowledge the history that was there before. So I really, really appreciate that. And for anybody out there that has dealings with nowadays with Phil Bruder and has seen his Raider teams, and it might not register that he is as great of a coach, because he just doesn't have the same type of teams that he has.
Right.
But he's still the same man, and don't get lost in the obvious. Listen to some of the things, if he's conducting himself a certain way on the field, stand within earshot of how he's talking to somebody in the stands in a private conversation, because here's something that you get from Phil's people. And this was always, to me, a gauge of character. Is, you can think anything you want when someone's putting on a show in front of you, and they're doing it on purpose. But when you talk to their parents and they say, I'd stand by that guy anytime, and that was something that you would always get from when you'd ask the families that played for him. And that tells you something about the man, and that he's able to create a relationship that wasn't all about the persecution of not executing the play and the word, again, accurate or not, of narcissism, and just, it's for me, it's a certain type of a beautiful thing to watch, because I think personas and styles and swagger, I mean, that's what make actors. You have to have a certain presence, and it's not the majority of the market. We're talking about the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. You look at all of these beautiful girls that are playing this game nowadays, and the skill level is great. I mean, would you agree that you don't have to look very far to see a good-looking swing online now, whether it's a Facebook feed or whatever. The game is developed. You're seeing a lot of people teaching and doing things closer to what's aesthetically good. But it brings me to the question of, you had a very successful playing career. Going back and hitting the greatest pitchers of your time when you were playing at 40 feet, wasn't this launch angle, let's get under it and lift it and see how far we can hit it. I mean, you had nasty pitches coming into all angles, and I would assume against the best, you didn't get many pitches to hit down the middle. So it's a different type of hitter.
For sure. I mean, just overall in the 70s, we had some amazing, Barbie Ronaldo, who grew up right here in Cerritos Junior College and went on to be a phenomenal Hall of Famer for the Breakheads and national team, and Kathy Aronson. When you look at the overall skill level, like at 40 feet, the swings were flatter, right? But when you look at those swings now with high-speed cameras and you break down that video, the naked eye thinks it's flatter.
But right in there around the contact point, everything else, it's right there.
From toe touch heel plant on to contact, we have 23/60ths of a second to get it done. So there's not where we have huge problems, and we could go off the rails on technical standards.
Sure.
But once we can do a better job of teaching America where there are principles that are non-negotiable and where style can become part of your DNA. My background's in kinesiology, so I've always been interested in the biomechanics of everything that we're doing. And where we're falling short as a sport overall is having a strong sense of best practices in each part of our technical game, each part of our character game, and providing our parents with a suite of tools to navigate the path to college. And so that, I know when I retired, that was something that I wanted to see if I could help, because people will say, oh, there's a Mike Candrea way of hitting and there's a Patty Gasso way of hitting. That has to do with approach.
Right.
But principles are principles, and that's
the absolutes
are
the absolutes. You
right.
can't fool those. You can take a certain picture of a certain portion of the swing, and it's the point of contact is going to be point of contact.
Right. And so I think where my work is and my interest is if I'm a mom or dad, I should receive a suite of tools when I go into rec ball or travel ball. If I'm a travel ball coach, I should get a suite of tools, and those standards should help guide me. And then we'll let us debate approach all day long.
Because we could talk about how to cook spaghetti the same way.
Right.
We don't have to get angry about it.
But the standard is we got to turn the flame on.
Sure, yeah.
And we don't have that in our sport. Yeah. And it concerns me because, unbeknownst to a lot of people, we're falling in love with the fact that the sport is gaining popularity at the top. So our numbers with ESPNW, we're one of the most favored sports within ESPN. ESPNW is the digital women's side, but ESPN that takes care of our television, the numbers are off the chart.
The ratings are there for the highest level of the game.
But the Aspen report came out a year and a half ago, and we're leading the country in the decline in 6 to 12-year-old girls. And I hope the listeners out there
and this would be primarily like rec league ages. So,
and what that means is no one is going to feel that in the next 10 years. But where will we be in 20? Yeah. Because when the pool gets smaller, you will sense a stall because you want the largest pool to develop the largest amount of kids to provide the largest opportunities as you go up the food chain of travel ball, high school, and college.
So does that mean where it appears to me in my eyes we have a higher number of specialized players, travel ball players, because the travel industry is booming, but if we don't take care of what's happening down there, there's going to be a lot of hotels with a lot of vacancies coming up. Right.
And I'm a big fan of all the differences in our associations, but our sport, I believe our sport is at a real tipping point. And
because of the lack of unity within the competition.
Yes.
Competition's, great in so many aspects, but there's not enough unity as a business culture. I've mentioned this, at a grassroots level when building your own success is one thing, but wishing the demise on your competitors, and failure is not healthy for the industry. I mean, we should all be competing and knowing what somebody else does well and why they're successful, but to enjoy someone else's lack of success doesn't do us any doesn't do us any good, because as a whole, we're a business community, we're a softball community.
And I think I sit in a unique position because of the college relationships I have and just being in the game for so long. I know Craig Kress. I know Don DiDonatis. Right. I know Dan Hank. I know these people, and what we can't do is pass judgment on those leaders just because somebody you have a turf war with down in your region of the country isn't reason to work together just because you're having a turf war. Right. And I feel like sometimes, as polarizing as associations can be, there's only one area where I think we can all come together, and that's in education. Mm-hmm. And the reason I think we can come together is there's no money to be made. No one has cornered the market on education because everyone is making money off of tournaments, hotels, travel, and then being able to scale your team locally. Maybe you're doing more things locally. One area we could all come together is in education. And that's what I'm going to push until my last days is, and I know for a fact, I brought together Don DiDonatis. I brought Dan Hay together and Ron Rand. They all came in the same room and said, let's try to figure this out. So I know their intention is there. And I just want people to learn more about the people that are driving these associations and not just put a slap judgment on them, right? I mean, my colleagues, I have many people think, oh, Tony Rico, what a money grabber. He's got a bazillion teams. What a money grabber. Yet they don't know all the things that you're doing behind the scenes.
Which kind of those obvious assumptions, though, because what happens is you get to a certain, in our tiny little softball world, you get to a certain level of this and you become dehumanized. So it's like, we're eating lunch at a fast food restaurant, and someone just mentions that the owner's over there in the corner, and we instantly start counting the cars in line and saying, we do math, and so they become a figure of the person owning the business. There's always a story, and I'm okay with that. Mike and I share stories about, in order for us to meet the responsibilities and the demand of our product, because this scaling of our product wasn't a business plan. It was saying yes to people that want to be part of. So what could we offer? And do we wait until we're so professionally structured in the education platform that, well, that's about 7 lifetimes away. So can we get people under our umbrella? We all have different approaches towards things. For me, that's these podcasts. Right. I can try to fly around to 23 states and to be there twice a year and then die in about 4 years from doing it. Right. But right now, the phone is the television. There's so much access through digital media, and this education that's why I want people to be able to hear me talk about our predecessors, or, we may agree or disagree in styles or this or that, but that's way past this. The best leaders of history got past those things and worked together with other leaders to make a change and create permanent change. And the things
that you're doing, you're offering to anybody that wants to listen.
Absolutely.
And so, it's the same when I speak to people about what's happening in Southern California with your program or with the Batbuster program. I said, before we pass judgment, look at all the things that they're doing behind the scenes. Follow Tony Rico around for 24 hours.
Do a little bit of due diligence.
Right. Follow Mike Stith around.
And if you have the same judgment, if there's something really dirty about us and anybody, well then, gosh, there's plenty of platforms we have things made up about us just because it just happens. It happens to go with the territory. But I think he and I embrace it, because I think you have to have a certain, I wouldn't call it skin thickness, but you certainly can't take things personal. You have to know what it is you're doing and why you're doing it. And in the end, is there a lot of forward motion? And anyone that does their due diligence, anyone that does a little research and this and that, and they start to get the concepts behind what we do. Again, for Mike to reach out to me and to bring everyone together that he did, there must have been, I don't know, close to 1,000 people there, 800 and that. And that's a big step for him to do that, because that wasn't always part of that culture.
And I think, remember, everybody's highly competitive. And to your families out there that listen to the podcast, it's so important to understand what your values are as a family. Do they align with the program you're affiliated with? And programs like yours and Mike, I talk about this all the time. I said, people, it's like you're at a university and you're the softball coach, and then there's a kid that's in the engineering department that ends up getting caught for drunk driving. There is going to be, when you're dealing with a large population, there will always be people that fall short. Sure. And so if we could do a better job of not judging that's not the way I would do it, and instead say, hey, is there any information I could get there that could make me better, my family better? Because right now, that's where we need the most support, is for our parents of performing children to understand what are the best practices to take care of my daughter in this experience, no matter who I'm playing for.
And to round out the physical emphasis of playing the sport with the psychological and behavioral aspects of them, because those are these important tools. If you can't compartmentalize and know how to put the right weight on the current stress that you're having. So, often in our culture, it's 500 pounds of stress on a 5-pound problem, because it's the way that we interpret it and the way we infer it. And if there's no guidance, there's no anybody in front of them. Imagine what I would feel like on a plane if I was under the impression that this guy had never been trained as a pilot.
Right.
Right. And really, that's our grassroots coaches. For a lot of them, they volunteer their time. And so, it's obvious that there's going to be a lot of things that the guy that knows how to defense a first and third play usually doesn't balance his books very well. And the guy that's very transparent and administrates and has the full year plan, and so everyone knows, he's not getting past the third round of any bracket play, because it's hard to find that balance. And so what it ends up, these it becomes a business entity where you have to surround yourself with people that have different skills. Because I say this over and over, even if it's just one team that you're managing, with the demands of softball business today, you're fooling yourself if you think you can do everything by yourself. Sure. Know your weaknesses, and you'd be amazed how many people want to help you from the outside. Everyone sees us as just coaches. I tell players, ask your coach what he does for a living sometime. You found out this guy was an air marshal. He's doing this. He's doing real things. You just know him as the dope that doesn't call the pitches right.
Right.
Or coaches, talk to your parents, and you're going to find that, somebody runs a public events or public speaking or whatever it is, and there's so many ways to supplement. Jalissa, who you met coming in here, she's a mom of a firecracker and reached out through this event, and what she offers professionally was just, and that really rounds out what it is we're trying to do. If I'm trying to learn everything about emotional stress and how it manifests and suicide prevention, that's even more on our plate. So surrounding ourselves with people, being able to pull in experience and pull in history, I think is important. And as long as we're doing that little by little, and there are people listening, I have hope. But I'm realistic to a certain degree about it too, because I believe out of the Wild West came the West. It's a beautiful place that we live.
Well, and not only that, but I always have hope because I know the people in travel ball. I know the people in college. That's why I have hope, is the people that are driving this sport. The quality of individuals overall. I say this all the time. 95% of the people in travel ball are amazing. Yeah. It's the 5% bad actors. But you know what, people? 95% of the college game is amazing. Yeah. And down here, 5% bad actors, too.
Yeah, I totally agree. And down here, it's the 95% of our behavior in that small pocket of competitiveness that we end up, so many people get not judged for, but remembered for us, because that's just the way our society works. But that's really important. So making a difference. So let's go a little bit to one softball. You retired, but you weren't done. You just retired from your position as extremely successful at UCLA, building that program, creating that legacy there. There's such a dynasty there now. And then you decide, I need to go, because you seem so much more connected to grassroots now in your involvement, not in your understanding of it, but in your involvement, kind of what's happening, all the way around, and not just that spectrum that we saw you at the college level. So tell me about One Softball, how it started, and what your mission is with it. And
one of the things that people didn't see it coming, right? The retirement. We were fully loaded. We're on the rise. We're continuing to win. Blah blah blah. But I was becoming more curious about helping the foundation of the sport, and so the stuff I'm doing right now with One Softball is the reason I retired. And so what I did was I retired, and I had no exit strategy. I just knew I wanted to help make the foundation of the sport stronger. And the number one thing I had to do was research, because to your point, even though I had an understanding, I knew I needed to do my research. What are the pain points? I have my opinion at UCLA, but I wasn't living rec ball. Travel ball.
Didn't have your hands on it.
I did not have my hands on it, or my ears.
Right.
Remember, I was dealing with a small
That really hit me when we spoke on Saturday or Sunday. Is your ears and eyes and hands are on it.
Oh, and so I spent 5 years doing my research. I traversed the country doing clinics, and I started asking, because I use technology. I love technology. My colleagues know that. Because technology is going to provide access, and access is going to give you opportunities no matter where you live. And so in those 5 years, I was able to synthesize our issues into 3 pillars. The parent is completely overwhelmed in the process to college. The coach is not educated on the technical standards of the sport. And the athlete has so much anxiety, and the game is no longer fun, and it's no longer their idea. Then I spent the next 4 years figuring out how I could do it. And I knew it fell in 3 ways. I first needed to collect the people that could solve the problems. Then I would have to be able to build that solution, the product, the content. And then last, I've got to be able to deliver it on a platform that everybody has access. So One Softball is really about serving the parent, player, and coach, providing a solution on a platform that can be delivered to them. And that's where we stand today. So we launched it. We're in a quiet launch right now. We just launched it in about 10 months ago, technically 11. And 2018 is going to be the year where we're actually bringing the platform to the people. And so everything on the website is free. We have over 170 assets. We have over 400 video vignettes from the best in the game, and One Softball will be coming, just so everybody knows, One Softball will be coming after Tony Rico to get an interview with him.
And has been, yeah.
Yeah, I've been coming after him for months now, but we'll get him, people, just so you know, we'll get him.
She'll get me.
I'll get him cornered. So I'm really excited about how we've brought the community together, both from a travel ball, rec ball, collegiate, national team, Olympian. We have all our Olympians are on board, and we've got our national team kids that we're trying to amplify their voice. But most importantly, our goal is to serve the parent. Yeah. I want One Softball to be the parent's first impression.
Wow, that's great. That's a great line right there. When you Google it out there, people, I like this. The first line that comes up, it says, One Softball, softball's most trusted coaches and greatest influencers coming together for our softball families.
Right, and it's one spelled out, ONE, softball.com.
Yeah. And so it's interesting because it's tricky to get kind of a mission type statement down to a few words when you have so many concepts behind it, but when you can really kind of, well, that's basically it right there, was their influencers coming together for our families, and it's interesting.
And there's a lot of confusion, right? Like my phone was blowing up. People are like, oh, we heard you're getting into the tournament industry. Oh, we heard you're going to create an association. And I'm like, wow, this is pretty amazing. No, actually, I'm just trying to get information to provide it directly to the parents, because I know that if we make the parents the smartest person in the room, that student athlete is going to have a great experience. Sure. And I also want One Softball to protect the travel coach. I want the parents out there to understand that guy and that gal, they raise their hand to volunteer. And if I could get our parents to remember, game day is her day. It's the student athlete's day. I'm asking the parents not to be on the journey. Yeah. I'm asking them to watch the movie.
Yeah. Watch your kids at work. Don't be at work with them. Right?
Yep. And so I know this is my calling. I really do. Yeah. And I'm passionate about it. I'm funding the whole thing 100% myself. So I think there's another, people are like, hey, I heard you got someone saying
how are you going to make your money on this one with advertiser, right. Sponsor?
My favorite rumor was, hey, I heard you got $1 million grant and that's how you're funding this. And I'm like, no, pension employee, and I'm using my own money. Yeah. And I wanted to be able to do that so I could be able to bring in everybody, so there wasn't that idea, oh, Sue, I can't help you because you're partnered with this sponsor, because I knew that could be an issue. And so to be able to, when families go on this website, you're going to see everybody that has been a huge influence in the sport, and every single person has volunteered their time to give their information for free.
You're not new to the rumor mill because you've been at such a high visibility level within our sport for so long. It's relatively new for me, the rumor mill, the untruths. In the last few years, boy, if we had a TMZ department in a company come along, they would just run with these little juicy little things and just run with them. I read one day. I read something on your social media I thought was, boy, you've had a lot of great things to say. This is going to be in my top. I'm going to say top 3 of things I've heard you say, and that was how to own up to your mistake. When somebody makes a mistake, you listen. I'm going to lie to our parents if I tell them that our coaches are never going to be human and make a mistake and have poor judgment or this or that. And if we're going to wait for the ones that don't make mistakes, we don't have any coaches at all. And so, but then people don't know what to do. And, there's a natural emotional path of kind of like hiding or not dealing with things. But you came out and basically said, own it. I'm going to let you say it, but it's basically own it, own up to it, and use it now to educate and put it right there out there. But you know what I'm talking about?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple things that in, the first part of my career, I was all about the W. Yeah. And I did
many coaches.
And I did many things that I will never be able to unring the bell on. Yeah. I'm never going to be able to unring the bell that I threw away the consolation trophy and it went on the wires. So if you really want to know Sue ENQUIST in the early part of her career, just Google ENQUIST trophy and trash and watch what comes up.
Wow.
I have so many stories like that have become part of my message now, and I regret that. I want that young alpha competitor that's all about yelling. I wish I could unyell more. I wish I didn't yell at my kids as much. I wish I wasn't the center on game day. And I challenge those coaches out there to take inventory on where they are right now, because I represent your future. I'm retired and I am just looking back 24/7. You will retire one day and you will have regrets that lie in, am I making this moment about myself? And Papa Wooden taught me something really important. He says, when you become a facilitator to success, it's easier to have common emotions where you're really leveled out. He said, Sue, you have not learned to love and to educate unconditionally. You're only loving when they're undefeated. When you learn how to facilitate, you will become a better influencer because you're not in it. And that was a turning point for me. And if coaches out there every single day in their hot moments, am I facilitating or am I actually taking the energy out of the moment and making it about me? Right. And maybe
and it's a natural trap. It happens naturally, especially when you're a leader or you were the ball player that, hey, we scored touchdowns. And this is what I did as a ball player. So you come as the coach. And then and we also know as coaches that there are times when you have to pull the team in a certain direction because they're not responding or this or that. And so that's balance of between influencing people and creating a direction, but not it becoming about you.
One thing I would love to get the listeners to be aware of is I'm interviewing 8, 10, 11, 12. I've got thousands of kids that I've interviewed online. And this generation of student athlete stands alone in that this is the first generation that will state their number one source of information is coming from their phone. Yeah. It no longer is the adult. Right. Now, that's number one. Number two is softball is no longer her idea. So she won't be engaged like her adult parents or adult coach. And so when the male coach or the female coach gets so excited and angered about the game, for them, softball fits into their life. It's not their life. And that's different.
And they become the third party in our equation.
Right. And so the lack of, when coaches say, oh, the kids just aren't as competitive, it's because this never was a passion. It got, for many kids, this has been thrust on them. Yeah. So if you could work harder in 2018 to make it fun and let a game break out, you will be more successful.
And if you don't know what fun is, go back to those of you that remember recess and remember that we didn't think about our arm angles or our leg angles in kickball or whatever. Go back to recess. Go back to, I just saw a video of Ted Holcomb's team. They did backwards softball. They just they threw with the other.
Third base.
Go back and get out of that other side of the brain and go in that other side where it's just enjoying, because we do all have that. It's just once we become competitive and then we teach, and then it's enamoring. The kinesiology, the biomechanics, it's enamoring. It's like popping the hood for a guy that loves the car or anyone that loves automobiles, and you're studying the pistons and the carburetors, but that's not winning the race. Those are completely different areas to be. And if we can educate these people, because it's a natural place to go to. It's a natural place to go to as a dad that wants to enjoy hitting with his daughter and take her in the garage and, but he doesn't realize he slipped into it, that it's more about him and she's not even enjoying the moment.
And if they could, just simply as a parent or a coach, and you may be that coach, I can just hear that coach out there going, oh, she doesn't understand. I'm not that guy. I'm not that gal. No, it's easy. You turn it and ask the kids, hey, kids, you're in charge of making the last 15 minutes fun tomorrow. Tell me what we're going to do. You'll be amazed at what they come up with. So you don't even have to do it.
Sure.
Just open that door. Allow them to do it.
And if you don't enjoy it yourself, just let them have the moment. Just go walk away, check the sports scores or something, but let the girls have their time. So that's going to take us into our last area that we wanted to discuss a little bit about, and that was around the circumstances that a lot of our players are in. And this last weekend, you and I participated in a memorial for Emma, and she had participated in the Firecracker and Batbuster organization. But it's not common that a young person takes their life. We've seen it before. It's not something that's happening every year or every other year, but it is happening. But the imbalance, the amount of kids that it's things aren't okay. The anxiety that you had mentioned earlier, it may manifest itself in so many different ways. An eating disorder, a cutter, the worst final situation is suicide. But let's talk a little bit about the stress that these kids go through, and really what message that we can send to parents, coaches, and players out there listening about how to deal with it's normal stress, but it is a roller coaster ride within our culture. And if you're not prepared for it and you're expecting something you don't know what to expect, it can knock you for a loop. So
Well, I think, and there's so many things to unpack in that statement. I first want to go at a really high level, and as parents and as coaches, if the first thing we can do is not judge anybody's level of anxiety, because once we judge, we diminish their value. So
And
that's
what do you
number
mean
one.
by judge? If we judge someone's level of anxiety,
When you have somebody that may be talking about, in your perceptions, unrealistic anxiety. So you have players right now that have anxiety around not performing well enough, and it runs very deep. And what happens in student athletes that have sustained anxiety, it's if they had it all in check, it would not be anxiety. It would just be a thought, and then it moves on. But what happens in the brain, and they've done lots of studies around anxiety and depression, what happens is the brain actually has a shift in thinking that is so real. And they go in a cycle, a spiral down. And so at a high level as a parent or a coach, if someone has constant anxiety, the last thing you want to do is minimize it. You actually want to engage them. And the real simple thing, a real simple tool to use is just to ask them, tell me more about how that feels.
Sure.
And let them talk it out. Because what we do know about teen suicide is the pain in that moment is so severe, it is going to relieve them by taking their life.
Right. It has nothing to do with how many people love them, who they're going to hurt by doing that. It has nothing to, even the act itself, it has nothing to do with very little. It's the fact that the pain will be gone. I can escape.
And remember that, especially with the teenage brain, the part of the brain that is managing normal executive thought is not developing as fast as the rest of the brain that deals with emotions. So even on a scientific level, they are at a disadvantage. And so as a parent, and then flip it. Let's talk about the parent that has a daughter that someone is confiding in the daughter about somebody that is talking about that.
Right.
And so what you do as a parent, you just want to encourage the idea that we understand there's lots of secrets when you're a teenager with your parents, but there are some secrets that are too dangerous. And so just start the conversation there. And Tony, I know that you're taking this on in terms of informationally, and so there's some great resources out there that I'm sure you're going to share, and we're going to be sharing on One Softball, is there is a level of education a parent has to take on that you're not going to feel as intuitive about that, and I would encourage them. But then the next layer is about the anxiety in general around children navigating the phone and the parents understanding the phone. If I could just have everybody pull back and understand something, and it helped me when I first heard this. As adults, the phone came into our life. It is a tool that we're actually, for the most part, some of us better than others, but we can turn it off. It's a tool. The student athlete today, it is not a tool. It is part of their existence in lifestyle. So when they polled 10 to 15-year-old children, they put the phone in their level of importance in their life right up there with breathing and food. So as a parent, what do we naturally do? Oh, that's ludicrous. Instead, listen. Okay, you see that as a value. Now we got to back it. We got to back off of that and go, okay, your thing that's just as important as food, we do have some boundaries around it. And you start that really young. So by the time they're at that age where their eyes are on the phone 24/7, they know and can control through discipline when to put it down, when to accept the things on the phone as being real.
So for us not to deny their reality, we can go back to maybe somebody telling us, you don't need the television. We didn't have that when we grew up, and we never, and then here we don't know anything about, and there are some people that have had that experience. So to know it is their reality, and then within that reality, create the boundaries and the structure around that so that there are some limitations, because if you just wake up in the morning at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're checking your phone just because your eyes are open for a couple of seconds, because I fell victim to that, and you kind of realize, what am I doing? Checking this, checking that, and it's part. You said it's part of their existence.
Right. And the other thing that I learned also is the importance as a parent. We're very good at reacting on a yellow flag that we see with our children. Parents love. There's nothing that's greater than parents love. But I think where I would like to educate our parents out there is to carry out some small behaviors that have nothing to do with being provoked by a yellow or red flag. And what is that? I would encourage every family member that if their child has their own computer, they have their own phone, that you have a systematic way where you're checking that phone's Google history. That's it. Just check their history, and you talk to your, because I'm a big believer in parents being really straight with their kids. The kids are so smart nowadays, and say, hey, there's going to be some standards that we have that we're just going to check just to make sure that we're keeping an eye on the history.
Way it's going to work, right?
It's like locking your doors at night.
Sure.
We do that because we're proactive.
Sure.
We know the odds are we're probably not going to get broken in, but it's proactive. I would encourage the parents to be proactive because that can start the conversation, and it's real simple. It's like, hey, tell me what you're feeling about blah, 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 especially when it has to do with, how do I commit suicide?
Sure.
How do I go about it? It can really be enlightening for parents. Don't assume your kid is good because she's an A student, she's the best one on the team, and she's the most popular in school. Because depression doesn't care how happy you are.
Right. And there are more straight A kids today diagnosed as bipolar, a lot of anxiety issues, and for the kids that on paper they look like they got it all together.
And Tony, if I could just weigh in from a collegiate coach's perspective, I'm not speaking for all college coaches, but I do know that this is the norm. The anxiety, depression issues that we're dealing with on the college side are part of our experience now. It's not, we're working so hard on the college side, it's not a stigma. So we don't want parents to not do something to help their student athlete because somehow it's going to get out that she has depression. If I could list the student athletes that came through our program that dealt with anxiety and dealt with depression, it would floor America. Yeah. And I want America to know it's okay, Mom and Dad. Talk about it. Be the person that creates the conditions for your student athlete to have peace and have an outlet to be able to communicate. If you can keep those communication coming with your children, you will have solved that. And I want to talk to the dads, like the dad. Oh, I'm not a talker. Coach, I'm not a talker. I talked to a dad the other day. He's like, Coach, I'm not the talker. My wife's the talker. And I said, no. Because you actually drip for 18 years her overall confidence when she gets to college. Sure. The confidence of the student athlete that's a female is directly a result of how the dad speaks to her.
Thank you.
And so the dads of daughters out there, I have a message for you, and I hope you take this with positivity, that catch her doing it right every day. And just drip her doing something right every day. So her foundation of confidence, when she becomes an independent female in college, when she gets in the gray area on Friday night with Mr. Popular, she can say, no, dude, I got a bigger mission going, versus this is the first male that has fallen in love with me. You are responsible for that. The mom just needs to be a strong, confident mom. And your problems and your issues don't need to be shared with your 12-year-old because you stain the brain of your young children based on your own behavior.
Don't try to be aware as best you can of what it is that you're actually saying. And when you're talking out loud about your own situation, because we do it as coaches, the rhetorical questions, I always ask 10-year-olds, when a coach turns around the dugout and goes, what are we doing? I said, are you supposed to answer that? And they all just start laughing like, no. And I said, imagine if you did, we're popping up, we're making the same mistake over and over. We seem to be completely helpless and we're really ruining your day. Catch yourself in the moment, and you may or may not have been taught this growing up, but when you're having your own personal issues, your own personal pain, could be finances, a very, very large stressor for a lot of our families. They don't have the disposable income, and they're trying to help their daughter position themselves to have equal marketing value as, so how many camps do I go to, all of these things. But if you talk about finances in front of your daughter, you have no idea how that can register. And it's not to say that you have to be careful in society now because, now you're an abuser because your daughter has a problem, or you've done this, you're a bad dad. No, that's not it, people. You could be saying something that, whether it needs a boundary or not, it's how your daughter takes it. It's that tipping point inside her mind. It could be the smallest thing. It could be something that in your mind, it doesn't, very few men ever question their skills. I always laugh at us and say, we all think in our 50s we can still shoot, hit, and throw and do everything until someone shows us a video and we see a little back fat and we see some things in our arm, range of motion is gone. We're like, oh, what happened to me? I'm the greatest player in the whole world. Right. And I said, it's so completely opposite of the way that your daughter is naturally designed in providing and doing different things. And when you understand that and thinking out loud, saying things, there is a way to validate. There is a way to validate her work. There is a way to watch her work and still have a conversation about it. So imagine your daughter as a doctor. She didn't lose the patient, now a failure because she lost the patient. And she didn't lose the patient, now you're going to go, well, wait a minute, we studied that chapter and that's not... No, you basically are going to say, well, so how did you feel about it? Well, Dad, I did what I was trained to do, and we diagnosed, we administered, and the patient didn't respond. And you're not looking for anything other than certainty from your daughter because you're proud she's a doctor. But when she just says, hey, that's the way it went today. And no, it didn't feel good, but this is my job, Dad. And we move on. But it's not so, it doesn't define you, as far as what happened that day. And I think that's a big point. A lot of guys like me out there, we miss that because we're too competitive and we're lost in that moment.
And even if it's the tiger mom, maybe it's the mom that is overly aggressive regarding that. And I say this often, if you could always remember the 6 magical words after the game. I love to watch you play. Yeah. And if you drip that, I love to watch you play, for 18 years, your daughter's going to understand that who she is more important than what she does. You have succeeded as a parent of a performing child if your child can say, when she's 18 years old and she's heading off to college, I know my value of who I am will supersede any batting average, any home run, any national title. You have succeeded as a parent, and they're ready to take on the collegiate crazy town.
And that word value is not enamoring as a championship or a scholarship or not, but that value she has to have and know her sense of value, because when that is gone, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they have naturally or anything like that. I think that's such an important aspect of it. I kind of tie in my talks, again, you get her in the car home, popped up with the bases loaded, lost by 1, kind of the Tom Hanks moment of, why didn't you hit the cutoff? And you're shaking, you're just so lost at, because let's be honest, we're competitive, we feel those things. And then you try your best to not give her your opinion and your analysis and your diagnosis of what was wrong with her swing. You just ask her what her approach was in that situation. And if she says with clarity, Dad, I was looking for a good pitch to hit, or Dad, I was looking to hit the ball at the middle, or whatever it is, but she doesn't hesitate. There's no, I was trying not to drop my shoulder. She's just answered in a way that you want to hear your daughter speak for the rest of her life. That this is what happened, this is what I thought, and that's it.
And I'm going to take a step further. I'm the person that says, when you get in the car, Dad, put your hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel, take a deep breath, close your lips, breathe through your nose, and don't say anything until she wants to talk about it. It will be the most difficult thing that you do as a parent of a performing child. And once you learn to speak when spoken to, you're going to struggle with this, because we make it about ourselves as parents instead of making it about them. And I ask the kids, I interview the kids because remember, after they're done with their travel ball experience, they come to UCLA and I interview them.
Yeah.
What was the best part? What was the worst part? And the kids that struggled emotionally had the overbearing parents. Yeah. Had the parents that were taking the hard stuff away from the kid, that didn't let the kid go through the stuff on her own so she develops her own confidence. And they were the parents that never had that ability to catch the kid doing it right. Yeah. But there was a theme with our tough kids that were really grounded. Their parents did a great job of high accountability, but also catching their kid doing it right for 18 years.
I'm going to give it a 2-step. So for you're new to the program, go with you get one question. When she answers it clearly, then you say, I think I got this from you. Where do you want to go to eat?
Yeah, exactly.
And then that's it. And then ultimately, when you've reached that personal nirvana, you're in the speak when spoken to mode. And boy, will that be my son's 26, John, and I think I just, you don't ever want to compliment yourself as a parent, but he works for the company and we do some things, we talk about some things, but I don't like to talk about the job at home.
Right.
It's just not the same conversation. In here, we can talk about things. And we were talking about a new aspect of some of the video stuff he's learning and the engineering. And so I had left in the morning to come here, and we talked about I'd laid it out there for him. So I came back and I really wanted to follow up on the conversation, just like a dad wanted to follow up on what happened in the game. And I sat there and we sat there in silence. We sat there in silence for close to 6 or 7 minutes. I just sat, and the television was on and he had his computer. And so I kind of looked over at my son and gave him like a, hey, what's up? And he looked at me like, hey, what's up? And he's kind of like, why is he so quiet? Like usually he's just, and I'm really myself, I'm saying, I don't want to bring this up. I've left it there for him. I don't want to bring this up. You know, you would think you'd have this down by now when your kid's 26, but hey, I'm human like everyone else. And then he brings it up. Real, you know. And I know that was a weird place for him because I think he probably wanted to say, how come you didn't bring it up like you normally do or whatever? And so I just left it. And it was about 6 or 7 minutes of awkward silence, which we usually have no problem speaking, but he knew that I wasn't engaging the way I normally do. So it's never too late, guys, dads, you know, that we're all, in the end, we're all working together. Sue, I can't thank you enough. I mean, I'm sorry I didn't get you in here longer, and I owe you need to be able to pin me down. It's just that, you know, that convention of all these, a lot of people, and I think I'm comfortable here in my little room where there's no one around. I'm okay being out on the field and stuff, but I definitely want to be able to offer whatever you need from me too with one softball, and I appreciate you coming down. I think there's just, for me, there's gold all over the place. It doesn't always have to cost you something. You know, you're expensing your own project, which I just think is phenomenal. You know, we have a situation here, you know, with whatever people might think about is going on or from the outside obvious perception. I'm proud that we have 11 employees. I'm proud that the core of this business are 4 women that are the backbone of this organization that allow me to talk and do the things I do. But I'm proud that we have enough stories of young girls, and well, they're older now, of writing stories of, hey, I was tougher in my motherhood because I just remembered this, or I remember that when my kid was sick, and you kind of, and it's a balance of tempering them, so developing a resiliency to these kids. But most of all, the big thing we want to touch on today is we don't ever want these kids to feel alone. Mm-hmm. And we want them to know that there's always some place to reach out to. So ideally, if, as you were mentioning, the parents can be proactive and learn how to communicate. If the Vegas odds aren't in your favor, and it's a really big step, you know, your kids have to know that there's places for them to reach out. A lot of times they're more comfortable telling a friend something, but that friend is their age. They don't have the life experience or the resources or outlets. And then something happens and that friend wasn't able to share with someone. So between the crisis text lines, the hotlines, there's plenty of resources out there dealing with TIP, so trauma intervention program, and how helpful they were with everyone. Watching our coach Ted Holcomb's team go through their own ceremonies, and it was, you know, grieving is part of the process. Don't deny yourself grieving. Before things happen, don't worry about asking your kids a question. In fact, I can tell you as a parent, the reason you don't, I'm speaking for you, the reason we don't ask them if they're suicidal is because we're afraid they're going to say yes. You know, but really what we've learned is if you ask, you're not going to put them in a suicidal mode because you ask the question. They're either there or they're not. They're going to be honest with you. So this educational platform, using this as an educational platform, I really, really appreciate it. And I look forward to any time we get to spend together. And as I opened it, I just really personally thank you, because you've always made me feel comfortable, welcomed. You know, there's a business aspect to this, but friends prove themselves over time. So I just really appreciate you, and I wish you the best of luck. I know you're going to knock it out with one softball, and I'm looking forward to seeing what's going to be happening later.
Well, thanks for having me, and thank you for loving the game so much. And to all the parents out there and coaches, may you never let the game get in the way of the friendships that you make in this sport. Tony, you're a great leader, a great influencer, and I'm proud to call you a friend.
Thank you, Sue. All right, everybody. We'll see you next time.